The autumn wind drifted through Ashford Manor's sweeping corridors as Lady Eleanor Harcourt descended the grand staircase with the poise expected of a young woman raised under the watchful scrutiny of England's aristocracy. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that drew admiration from those who valued grace over spectacle, yet whispers followed her like a faint echo, whispers about her family's dwindling fortune, her father's uncertain health, and the relentless pressure upon her to secure a marriage that could restore the Harcourts' fading prominence. She had accepted these burdens with a calm resolve, choosing silence where others would have complained, and reflection where many would have rebelled. Her engagement to the mysterious Duke of Ravensfield had been announced only a fortnight earlier, and society already buzzed with feverish curiosity about the match. The Duke had kept himself largely hidden from public view, making rare appearances at state functions, and even then only briefly. Yet he was known for his unexpected generosity toward impoverished tenants, his sharp intelligence during parliamentary debates, and the deep loyalty he commanded among his servants. Rumor insisted he was solemn, perhaps aloof, and some claimed he carried old grief like a shadow. But Eleanor felt a flicker of hope rather than dread, believing that perhaps reticence was merely another form of caution and not a cold heart. On the morning they were to meet formally at Harcourt House, Eleanor steeled herself, uncertain of what impression she might make. She had rehearsed polite greetings, reminding herself to appear composed, though attention she rarely acknowledged pressed against her ribs. Her mother had insisted upon a carefully chosen gown and polished conversation, but Eleanor suspected the Duke valued sincerity over charm. Her intuition was rarely wrong, though she often kept her thoughts guarded, aware that women in her position were safer when they revealed little. Unknown to her, the man she expected to greet as a duke had already arrived. Disguised under the simple attire of a companion to his own steward, Adrian Sinclair observed the household with a critical eye. At 30, Adrian had learned to navigate nobility with strategic restraint, especially after a betrayal years earlier had left him wary of alliances forged through flattery or ambition. He intended to ensure that his future wife possessed both integrity and kindness, virtues he prized more than lineage. His plan was simple: meet Eleanor as an equal, a quiet observer, to understand the truth of her character before presenting himself with the full authority his title carried. When Eleanor entered the drawing-room, she greeted the steward with polite warmth, then turned to Adrian, assuming him an attendant. Her expression held no trace of dismissal or superiority. Instead, she offered him the same courtesy she granted the steward, asking whether he had traveled far and whether he had been treated well upon arrival. Adrian felt unexpected relief. Many ladies of the ton would not have spared a moment for a servant, yet she addressed him with genuine concern. Still, he reminded himself not to be swayed too quickly. Appearances were deceptive. If he expected honesty from her, he must first remain vigilant. As the conversation progressed, Eleanor felt oddly at ease with the quiet man beside the steward. His eyes, clear and thoughtful, held a depth she couldn't quite place. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did respond, his words held unmistakable insight. She found herself curious, wanting to understand him, though propriety demanded distance. Her mother watched sharply from across the room, reminding Eleanor with a single narrowed glance that she must not grow too familiar with those she believed beneath her station. Yet Eleanor continued to speak kindly, resisting the pressure to retreat into cold formality. Adrian studied her closely. Not her beauty, though it was evident, but the subtle honesty in her gestures, the consideration in her questions, the quiet steadiness that suggested resilience rather than fragility. But just as he began to feel a cautious optimism, a sudden shift in Eleanor's demeanor caught him off guard. When her mother stepped away to address a servant, Eleanor's gaze drifted momentarily toward a sealed letter on the mantelpiece. Her shoulders tensed, and for a fleeting instant, a shadow crossed her features, something like fear or regret. Adrian noticed at once. He was trained to read people, and that subtle change rang louder than any spoken confession. Before he could consider its meaning, Eleanor excused herself with measured calm, leaving the room a touch too quickly. Adrian's instincts sharpened. There was something she concealed, something that troubled her deeply. He wondered whether it concerned him, the engagement, or matters entirely unrelated. If her secret threatened their future, He needed to uncover it before revealing his own deception. Yet the thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Eleanor retreated to the quiet of the library, leaning against a tall shelf as she forced her breath to steady. The letter contained news she had prayed would never resurface, news that could endanger her family's fragile standing and destroy any chance of a future with the Duke. She had kept the truth hidden for months, convinced that silence protected those she loved. But now, with the engagement public and expectations looming, she feared her secret would break not only her reputation but her chance at genuine happiness. Adrian, still disguised, stood in the drawing room wrestling with uncertainty. He had intended only to test her sincerity, not to stumble upon a mystery that might unravel everything. Yet the image of her strained expression lingered in his mind, stirring an unexpected protectiveness. For the first time, he questioned whether his scheme was fair, whether withholding his identity placed unfair pressure upon a woman already burdened by fears he could only guess at. The afternoon meeting concluded with polite parting words, but tension lingered unspoken between them. Eleanor sensed the quiet observer had noticed more than she wished anyone to see. Adrian, meanwhile, walked away torn between admiration and unease. Both carried secrets that could reshape their future, yet neither knew how deeply their truths would cut when finally exposed. In the days that followed their initial meeting, the Harcourt estate revealed its quiet unraveling with a candor Eleanor wished she could suppress. Every creaking floorboard and dimmed corridor testified to years of financial strain, though she worked tirelessly to preserve a semblance of dignity. Adrian, still veiled beneath the unassuming role of a visiting attendant, moved through the estate like a silent witness to a story no one intended him to see. He observed unpaid servants who remained out of loyalty rather than wage, a kitchen working with shrinking supplies, and a library where Eleanor spent evenings mending volumes whose bindings had long surrendered. None of this she voiced aloud. Instead, she carried her burdens with the grace of a woman taught that composure was her last currency. Eleanor's younger brother, Henry, remained unaware of the true extent of their difficulties. She shielded him with tenderness, tutoring him herself to avoid the cost of a governess. Adrian occasionally glimpsed them from a distance, her patient smile, Henry's eager questions, the soft encouragement she offered each time he stumbled. Such moments struck him with an unexpected intensity. He had anticipated politeness, perhaps duty, but not this quiet resilience that seemed to grow stronger beneath pressure. One morning, while walking the garden path, Eleanor paused near a stone bench, noticing a small pressed wildflower wrapped in thin parchment resting upon it. She picked it up, puzzled, though touched by the simple beauty of the gesture. There was no note, no indication of its giver, only the faint scent of lavender and a delicacy that suggested deliberate thought rather than accident. She carried it inside, unsure whether to place it among her keepsakes or dismiss it as a servant's mistake. Adrian watched from afar, his heart tightening in a way he had not anticipated. He had meant the token as a harmless test of sensitivity, but her gentle astonishment unsettled him, stirring a tenderness he hadn't prepared for. Later that afternoon, Eleanor traveled discreetly to the village under the guise of visiting a dressmaker. Adrian followed at a cautious distance, suspicion having taken root in him ever since he saw the letter that had shaken her. She entered a small agency office tucked behind the mill, its brass placard reading, Miss Adler's Governess Placement Services. The revelation struck Adrian like a sudden blow. He lingered outside, hearing only fragments of the conversation within. Obligations, unpaid debts, imminent deadlines. When Eleanor finally emerged, her expression was composed, but a faint tremor in her hands betrayed the cost of what she planned. As she returned home, she walked with the resolve of someone who had accepted humiliation as the price of survival. Adrian, hidden behind the facade of an observer, felt an ache he could not rationalize. He had expected duplicity, perhaps ambition, not a woman preparing to sacrifice her social standing simply to safeguard her family. Her secret was now his burden too, tormenting him with questions he had no right to ask. News of Eleanor's visit to the village quickly rippled through local gossip. By the time she reached Harcourt House, several servants whispered that the future Duchess was seeking employment, work considered an unforgivable disgrace for a noblewoman. Eleanor overheard two maids speculating whether the Duke would sever the engagement once the rumor reached Ravensfield. She held her composure, but her stomach tightened with dread. If the truth emerged before she found a solution, her family's remaining reputation would crumble. That evening, Eleanor attended the Ravensfield winter ball, where her future husband, unbeknownst to her, the very man she had spoken so freely with, would make his first ceremonial appearance since their engagement. She wore a gown carefully mended by her own hand, its seams reinforced with invisible stitches. Though she stepped into the ballroom with poise, whispers swirled instantly around her like smoke. Some ladies offered brittle smiles, others shared coy glances, as though entertaining private amusement. Adrian stood on the balcony overlooking the grand hall, dressed in the full regalia of his station, every inch the Duke of Ravensfield. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow upon the swirling dancers, yet he watched only Eleanor. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her fragile composure that struck him most. She moved through the room with a quiet bravery, fully aware of the scrutiny that clung to her. When she noticed him observing her from above, she did not recognize him as the attendant she had spoken to before. Instead, she curtsied with a solemn respect, though her eyes carried a sadness deeper than her smile could mask. Adrian felt a sharp wave of guilt for standing behind dual identities while she bore her hardships openly. Later, he sent her a small velvet-wrapped book of poetry, presented formally as a gift from the Duke, not from the man she had confided in. The gesture was meant to reassure her, to show that someone valued her presence amid the rumors, but it only deepened the tension he felt inside. When she received it, she sought out Adrian in his disguised role, confiding softly that she did not know whether the Duke's intentions were sincere or purely strategic. Her uncertainty, combined with her evident longing for honesty, pierced him. "You deserve kindness," she murmured, her voice strained, "but I do not know whether His Grace even sees me beyond an obligation." The words unsettled Adrian so deeply that he struggled to maintain his composure. Her vulnerability was not the weakness society assumed. It was the bravery of a woman who had given everything yet asked for nothing. The contradiction tormented him. Not long after the gift was delivered, Adrian overheard a conversation that confirmed his worst fear. Eleanor, speaking in hushed tones to a discreet agent in the estate garden, arranged her departure date to begin her employment. She intended to leave before the wedding scandalized her fiancé's reputation. Her sacrifice was absolute, protecting the Duke's name even when she believed he might not fight for hers. The realization shattered Adrian's confidence in his own scheme. It was no longer a simple test of character but a cruel deception inflicted upon someone who had shown only courage and sincerity. He watched as she walked away beneath the pale moonlight, her steps steady despite the weight of impending ruin. For the first time since conceiving his plan, Adrian questioned whether he deserved her forgiveness at all. The storm arrived without warning, sweeping across the Ravensfield countryside with fierce determination, rattling shutters and shaking ancient oaks as if nature itself wished to expose every concealed truth. Eleanor had been in the lower archives gathering documents she hoped to save before her departure, still intending to vanish quietly and spare the Duke the disgrace of marrying a woman burdened by debt and secret employment. The rising water crept beneath the door faster than she anticipated, swallowing the floor in a cold rush that made her gasp. When she reached for a heavy ledger, the current knocked her off balance, sending her stumbling against a shelf. A moment later, strong arms closed around her, lifting her from danger with decisive strength. Adrian, no longer disguised but still unknown to her in that moment of panic, carried her into the safety of a nearby barn glowing with lantern light. Inside, the storm's roar dulled to a distant growl. Both stood dripping, breathless, their clothes clinging to their skin, though neither seemed aware of the discomfort. Eleanor attempted to speak, but her words failed, replaced by shivering silence. Adrian removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders with an instinctive tenderness that startled even him. For the first time since beginning his deception, he allowed unguarded worry to show in his eyes. Eleanor sank onto a wooden crate near the fire he built, warming her hands as she tried to steady her trembling. Her composure, carefully maintained for months, cracked beneath exhaustion and fear, revealing a truth she could no longer conceal. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried the weight of sacrifices no one had witnessed. She confessed the extent of her family's ruin, her father's debts, and the desperate plan she had forged to protect her brother from consequences he was too young to understand. She admitted she had accepted the engagement not out of ambition but necessity, believing the Duke deserved a partner capable of contributing stability rather than drawing him into misfortune. Her confession was neither dramatic nor self-pitying. Instead, it emerged in soft, measured breaths, shaped by a woman who had long practiced restraint. Adrian listened in stillness, struck by the steadiness of her courage and the quiet pain etched into her voice. Guilt tightened around his heart, for he had crafted a falsehood while she had simply endured truth. As the storm raged, they spoke with an intimacy neither had dared before. Eleanor expressed gratitude that he, as a simple attendant, had shown her respect in a time when others whispered cruelly behind her back. She confided that she felt safest speaking to him, unaware of how deeply those words cut. Adrian longed to reveal himself, to assure her she had misunderstood the Duke's heart, yet fear held him still. He could not bear the possibility that she might reject him once she learned the full measure of his deceit. The firelight flickered across her face, illuminating the fragile hope she carried despite everything, and he found himself drawn to her with a sincerity that transcended his earlier intentions. Their hands brushed when he offered her a blanket, and the delicate contact sent a shiver of longing through him. He wished he could speak plainly, but his title pressed upon him like an anchor. Instead, he whispered words that hinted at truth without relinquishing it entirely. He told her she deserved a man who saw her strength and admired the integrity beneath her silence. He assured her that courage such as hers was rare among any rank, and that no noble title could outshine the honor she carried within. Eleanor looked at him with a depth of emotion that unsettled them both, her eyes reflecting gratitude and something more vulnerable, as though she feared she might trust him too deeply. The storm subsided by morning, but another tempest awaited them. Upon returning to Ravensfield Manor, Eleanor found the drawing-room filled with relatives and guests whose expressions were sharpened with suspicion. Her cousin, eager for attention, announced that Eleanor had secured employment as a governess, declaring her unfit to become a duchess. Gasps rippled across the room, followed by murmurs that pricked her skin like needles. Eleanor stood perfectly still, refusing to let her humiliation show, yet her pulse pounded violently. Every eye turned toward her, demanding explanation. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Adrian stepped forward in full ducal attire, sending a wave of astonishment through the assembled crowd. He addressed them with a clarity that froze every whisper. He confessed that he himself had concealed his identity, choosing to meet Eleanor as an equal to understand her character more truthfully. He declared that any blemish upon her reputation was his responsibility, not hers, for it was he who had acted from mistrust. The room fell silent, shaken by the confession. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief, realizing the man she had confided in was the very Duke whose judgment she feared. Her chest tightened with a mixture of astonishment, hurt, and sudden comprehension. When they retreated to a private chamber, she demanded an explanation with trembling restraint. She asked whether he had believed her capable of deception, or whether he had simply wished to test her like a subject rather than a partner. Her disappointment wounded him more deeply than her anger ever could. He admitted he had feared being chosen for his title rather than his person, and he had acted foolishly in searching for sincerity through falsehood. He told her he regretted every moment that caused her pain. His voice wavered as he offered her freedom from the engagement, promising he would not obstruct her future if she wished to leave him behind. The vulnerability in his admission softened some fragment of her resentment. She recognized the sincerity in his remorse and saw, behind his dignity, a man trying to atone for a mistake born of fear rather than malice. She took time to steady herself, then acknowledged that while his deception wounded her, it did not erase the compassion he had shown in moments when no one else had offered kindness. She reminded him that trust was fragile but not irreparable. They stood facing one another as equals, the space between them filled with unspoken longing and tentative reconciliation. At last, Eleanor spoke with quiet certainty. She said she would marry no title, but she might still marry the man who had given her a wildflower without expecting anything in return. Relief washed over Adrian with breathtaking force, and the uncertainty that had tormented them both dissolved. Their bond, forged through truth and trial, emerged stronger than either had imagined. They stepped forward together, ready to face a future rebuilt through honesty, partnership, and a love reshaped by revelation rather than illusion.